Today on the Cameron Journal podcast, I am joined by Bernd Reiter. He is a Fulbright Distinguished Chair, the Erasmus Mundus Visiting Professor, and a Research Associate at Harvard University. He has recently published two papers we're going to be talking about. Are there books? I'll find out. We'll find out. Anyway, they're called Honor and White Privilege in Brazil and Beyond and the African Origins of Democracy. And we're going to talk about how the Global South could teach the Global North about democracy and all this type of thing, and which I think is gonna be really, really exciting, and also possibly a tie-in, a tie-in with what we can do to fix our fractured democracies. So, welcome, Ben, to the Cameron Journal podcast.
Very much for having me. I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, no, thank you for stopping by. We really appreciate it. So, let's dive right in. And why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your work and your research, and then we'll find out more.
Yes, so I am a professor of political science. I currently work at Texas Tech University.
Mm,
Uh, I'm actually affiliated with the Department of Languages and Cultures. So I'm sort of in the humanities side of things. I was born and raised in Germany, educated in Germany up until the masters. I got my PhD in the United States. I'm an American citizen. But you
mm.
might notice I still have a little accent there, so some words come out weird. I realize that's because I was again born and raised in Germany. My research is about um, sort of looking for innovative solutions from the global south, as you said. I believe that there's problems in our democracies and in our economies that are not just affecting the United States, they are affecting other countries as well. And I do not believe that the solutions to these problems can come from the global north alone. I think that we need to look around and try to learn how other countries, other places, in other times, or right now, have approached these problems. And I think we would be worse off if we only considered solutions that come out of the global north. So have done research. Most recently, I've done some empirical research in Botswana. That was the foundation for this book on the African origins of democracy. I've been a Fulbright scholar in Brazil, and that led me to write this book about status, the importance of status in Brazil and beyond. So those are the two books that you mentioned. Um, yeah, so that's my story. I'm in Lubbock. I'm in Northwest Texas, in the Texas Plains right now.
No, that's amazing. I wanted to kind of find out, kind of just right from the jump, why did you pick this as a, how did you pick this research area and why did you kind of continue to pursue this? And as a side note, I have another guest coming up named Ed Macklouf, who kind of is about the same thing. And I immediately want to get you guys together for one of my new salons that I'm starting. So I'll remind everyone I am launching Cameron Journal Salons, which are going to be Q&As with a panel of kind of best of the guests of the show sort of thing. And it will be free to Cameron Journal Plus subscribers, but those who aren't subscribers have to pay. So now's a great time to subscribe to Cameron Journal Plus. Anyway, but you guys are on the same path, and I'm very excited. I want to get you two together almost immediately, and we're in the middle of planning that product, so this is perfect. Anyway, how did you decide to start researching and looking into this that ultimately led to these books and this whole career?
Well, look, I mean, I'm no spring chicken. I've been doing this for a while, and I started when I was living in Germany.
Well, we
And
got to
it,
look back through the archives a little bit, really get back into the dusty books.
well, I did actually what was then called piecework in Colombia. So when I was very young, I ended up in Colombia working with abandoned children, street children, and also in sort of the Pacific coast of Colombia, a mission station there was had a contract with a Catholic church, and I got interested in Latin America. There was a particular issue around racism, the importance of racism affecting the people in the Pacific coast of Colombia. That led me to then study Latin American studies. So I have a degree in Latin American studies, and I focused on race in Latin America. I went to Brazil to get a deeper understanding of this and studied there for a while in Salvador Bahia in the northeast of Brazil. So I was on this path, living in Colombia, then studying and living in Brazil. And then I wrote a dissertation in New York City at the CUNY Graduate Center about the importance of activism and civil organizing for democracy because that has been had been sort of my experience, and I was looking for a way how to make sense of this. I wrote a dissertation about it, and once you're here and you get a dissertation in political science, then I ended up, here and on the job market, and I got my first job at the University of South Florida in Tampa. I was there for 15 years. At the end, I was the director of the Latin American Institute there, and for the last 6 years, I've been at Texas Tech. Here, also affiliated with, again, with this time with the language and culture department, but with a focus on Latin America. So my path started sort of from social work and civic activism to then into trying to understand this and trying to find sort of analytical tools and frameworks to make sense of all of this.
No, no, that's really cool. I also took a similar academic path. So my first master's degree was in diplomacy, and I emphasized in terrorism and asymmetrical warfare. Um, So, because that was a very hot topic, I was in school between 2009 and 2011, and I was the first class from that concentration in the diplomacy program at Norwich University. And so, yeah, so very familiar. Now, this is a dumb question, but it's fun, and I believe that we should always have fun before we get into democracy. What is it with Germans in Latin America? All the like the Nazis in Argentina. The current president of Mexico is named Scheinbaum. What does y'all get? How did Germans decide Latin America was the place to move to? How did that happen?
Well, you talk about different people now, different kinds of Germans who ended up in Latin America. You're right. I mean,
Well, not everybody was fleeing the unfortunate events of the 1940s. Some people just willingly showed up, but it seems like Germans are kind of like, we got to get out. This country is gray, miserable, and cold. We need somewhere sunny, warm, and lovely. And they looked at a map and saw Mexico or Argentina or Paraguay and said, get a boat, we're going.
oh,
Like,
look, I mean, you're right. The historical presence, there is all kinds of stories about migration, sometimes forced migration, sometimes planned migration, sometimes running
yeah,
away from the Nazis, sometimes running away from those who were pursuing the Nazis after the war.
yeah,
And the more sort of current, so my generation and younger, Germany just has a lot of, we have a good social system. At the end of the day, on average, I think we get about 6 weeks of vacation if you're employed in Germany,
right,
and salaries are good, so that allows people to explore and travel. So Germans travel a lot. Wherever you go, you will find some Germans traveling. And
true.
of course, given that we are sort of in the northern part of the world and the winters are sort of long and cold, they tend to look for warmer climates. So yes, you will find some Germans traveling in warmer parts of the world, enjoying beaches and being out and about. So lots of tourism. German tourism is a big component of German society.
Yes, yeah, I have a guy I'm working with right now who is German and had quit. He worked for BMW, BMW, um, and is living in Switzerland, and we're doing a new boat tour startup with a partner of his, and I'm kind of like, Germans moving to a sunny climate, how cliche. And so I'm looking forward to checking out the product we're going to create in Italy myself. Because I'm currently living in New England and we're covered in feet of snow. It's like living on a glacier. So I'm also getting the German attitude of I need a client with a sunny product. Ah, you want to do a boat tours? Doesn't matter how much. I just want to go on the boat when it's all said and done. So I get that. I was just always curious about that because it was always this funny thing to be kind of like, why are we standing in Buenos Aires and I'm hearing this makes no sense. But yeah, no, now it makes all that travel and everything, it makes sense. So
Lot of
no,
living
that's
still
really
is.
cool.
Almost like people make jokes about this in Germany, that Germans travel every year. Most of us twice a year. I mean, I haven't lived
Yeah.
a long time in Germany. I've been living here in this country since 1998. But even my parents, they go on trips twice a year. It's part of German culture almost.
No, no, it's quite impressive. Anyway, all right, back to the serious stuff. That was just a little fun sidebar. We'll get back to the serious stuff now. Um, so, I want to dive into, I want to dive kind of right into the kind of the democratic crisis. So, I don't need to tell you, obviously, here in the United States, we are in the middle of what can only be described as a decade-long democratic crisis, and the inability of institutions and other branches of government to check the executive power is growing by the day, sometimes by the hour.
Mhm.
And people, like to say this began with Trump, but we all know the rot. Those of us who are old enough to have lived through the George W. Bush years know that the rot started long before Trump. And that, we've had issues a long time beforehand. And so I kind of want to, from your perspective, especially knowing so much more about other systems, what do you think is at the heart of the American political crisis? I would argue Europe's been in a slow rolling one for about 15 years, especially coming out of the 2008 financial crisis and what they did to Greece. And with the migration crisis and all this type of thing. I think the euro has been really great for the Germans and almost nobody else. Funny how that works. I used to joke, I said, Angela Merkel has more power over Europe today than Hitler ever did because she controls the money. And
Mm.
she can bring Europe's economy to its knees tomorrow if she so chose. The ECB can completely change capital flows in Europe. They all have more power, way more power than actually ruling these places. So, the traditional fortresses of democracy are in crisis. From your view, how did we get here?
So that's a big question,
It
but I
was
think
a big lead up to it, which I'm sorry for, but
no,
yes.
you know, I think you're right. I think this is not just an American-US problem. We're seeing sort of authoritarian tendencies on the rise in Germany with the AfD, in France,
Front
uh,
National.
and in Hungary, and not even outside of Europe. You see this also happening in Argentina. You saw that. You see that right now. You saw it in Brazil. Uh,
Javier Milei, yeah, Bolsonaro.
exactly.
Erdogan in Turkey's been going on forever, and they're a NATO country, so we can't even complain that loud. You know,
So, this is a global phenomenon. I think we actually living in a very interesting time where my sense is that this whole model that all of these democracies are built on, which is this model of liberal democracy where citizens are not really involved in politics and take care of their private lives and hand over the business the business of politics to a few professional elected officials. I think that model is running its course. I have the sense that people are discontent with what democracies are able to deliver for them. I think that we need to look for other ways to organize so we get more control in politics. And because there is, as we have not, and if people have been sort of becoming distant from the whole system and to understand how the system works, I think there's also more and more space for weird theories, that are really based on ignorance how politics works. So conspiracy theories are thriving. I think that what we then also live in is a media world that helps to spread these. Then we have a political class that ends up pitching stories, and these stories are always blame each other. So we are, all of us citizens in from different places, and we end up, instead of looking at how our government is failing us and how states are failing us and how representatives are failing us, we're looking at each other. Oh, it's the immigrants, or it's minorities, or it's women, or it's liberals, or so I think we're being manipulated, all of us, in that sense. I think there's a fundamental problem of the system, of the way we organize this, of sort of a representative democracy. I think the very idea of representation is problematic, and is showing us this right now. Uh, and I think we need to look for sort of solutions, and that's what I do in my work. As an academic, I made it my work to go around and look for how can we address this. Where are some examples, even at a small scale, where people have been able to fend this off, where people are more involved, more informed, have more control over their own lives, don't live in systems where they feel like they're alienated from power, where the gap between rulers and ruled is not so big, where they feel more uh, sort of in control. So that has been my work, and I think there's some inspiring examples. But yeah, I think it's a crisis of the system, how we organize politics, how we have organized politics.
Yeah, and we'll circle back to solutions in a moment. I want to dig into the point about being dissatisfied with representative democracy.
Hmm.
Because I'll admit I'm a bit old-fashioned. I do with more of the guardrails that we don't have in this country yet. Um, I think it is one of the best, most powerful, most stable ways of organizing a government the world has ever seen. Obviously, not having money in politics, thank you, Buckley v. Vallejo and Citizens United, is the better, certainly the much, much better option. Um, I think and it's funny because I see the opposite where you think, oh, people need more control and more involvement in politics. I'm seeing the opposite. I think people want to be much less involved in politics. I think people they don't understand most of this stuff, which is great. It keeps me in business. Cameron's Roll News Hour Mondays at 7. But it keeps me in business. They don't understand it. But they don't really want to be involved. They just want the system to work for them and they don't really care about how that is achieved. They
Right.
just want that to happen. And I think in this country, the lack of delivery of basic services is really starting to show, and people are getting mad about that. I think
Yep.
in Europe, you have this sort of technocratic moribund situation where nothing gets done. Everything is so tenuous. You barely have a majority in parliament. A no confidence vote can happen at the drop of a hat, and all of a sudden you don't have a government for 7 years. Thank you, Belgium. Sort of thing. Or you're cutting crazy deals with far right parties to get a majority that gets to Brexit. Thank you, Gordon Brown. Or you are, trying to cling on to some sort of center left coalition, which is the Christian Democrats are doing in Germany to hold off AfD in the Bundestag. So there are problems and there are difficulties and all this stuff. And I think the chaos of the system on both sides of the Atlantic has left voters deeply dissatisfied. And I think what I hear you're saying is that you're kind of like, yeah, this system has taken us as far as we can go. We have to
Well,
completely radically reform.
well, no, I think you're right in that people we live in systems that where the incentives are such also that people don't want to be involved. Why would they be involved? It seems tedious, it seems time consuming, it seems something that's better left to professionals. Um,
Right.
I think what we're seeing though is that people have expectations towards democracy, and I think sort of a basic expectation is that they have control over their lives, over the political system under which they live, over the laws under which they live. So I think that expectation that in a democracy somehow ultimately sovereignty rests with the people, I think that expectations is still there. And I think what I'm saying is more and more we moved away from that. And I'm not saying that we need to sort of have a revolution and get rid of the system, but I do think we need to find ways to revitalize the system so that people can recover the sense that they live in a place where they have a say in the laws, in the rules that affect their lives, where they have an active participation and even a sense of control, because I think that's what people expect of democracy. That's at least how I interpret when they had, you know, the Arab Spring and stuff like that. People are willing to die for a system where they're not run by a dictator, but rather where they have a say in that. But then you get a representative system, and it seems like you hand it over to a class of professional politicians, and again you end up frustrated because you feel like you don't really have a say. And I think that sense of alienation, of not having control, not having a say, there's books out there saying, "Oh, they don't represent us." That sentiment I think is pretty widespread. And so
Yeah.
my work is about what can we do, not explode the whole system, but rather how can we reform it and bring back that spirit that says we can control our own lives, we can control the system. That's the promise of democracy. It always has been, as far as I can tell. And I think
Right.
that's the frustration comes in.
But let's also talk about the big, and I want to talk about some of your suggestions and ideas in a moment. But let's get through problems first. Let's also address the elephant in the room. Democracy has not worked well since you've had a corporate takeover of government. One of the very first essays I wrote way back in 2014 was called How We the People Became We the Corporation. And in that argument, I said, Government has become a line item expense for businesses. They're not participating in society as earnest players who want society to grow and who see themselves a part of it. Their whole job is how much money do we have to spend in order to not be regulated and do what we want. And they've calculated about how much that is in lobbyists and political donations, and they write the checks, and the system, especially in the last 25 years, has ground to a halt.
Yes.
The Europeans are a little bit better. They have not had quite the takeover because there's not money in politics in a lot of countries the same way it is in this country. Although Elon Musk is trying to fund AFD in Germany, sort of thing. But so how do we deal with that big elephant in the room? What do you do about corporate power?
Well, I think you're right. I mean, I think we have seen certainly a decline, you know, with this Supreme Court decision that allowed that defined money as voice and gave the corporation recognition of the same standing as people, which clearly they are not. So I think to keep money out of politics is a very important um, step when we talk about what can we do to improve the system. So and there are examples out there how to do that, but certainly I agree with you. This cannot work if you have speakers in the room who speak so loud, who control so much of the media time that average people have no say and cannot be heard. So it starts by, it would at this along this line, it would start by saying, well, we have to find ways how to reestablish that every person, and I mean person, not juridical person, not a corporation, has a voice. And we have some. If you look up in Vermont, we have these town halls. You see people coming together and debating public things. That's really what democracy is all about. And if that gets out of hand, and if you have some corporations come in, and of course lobbying is part of this, um, you know, uh, hollowing out the whole system so that people do no longer even listen to each other. They just do whatever the lobbyist pays them to do, or influences them in a direction where they can then make more money. So I think all of these are very concrete problems that have made it worse, for
Yeah.
sure. The constant strive towards getting reelected, um, the manipulation. We watching this, like this has become sort of spectacle democracy where we just watch it, and I'm assuming a lot of people watch it in dismay, maybe even disgust, saying, "What's going on here? This is not okay." So I'm with you on that diagnosis. Yes.
Yeah, all right. Well, let's dive into the fun part, all of your clever solutions. So, we've gotten a little familiar with the problems and the difficulties and the unique situations in these countries. When you went to Brazil and all these places, what did you find were possible solutions, especially at the national level? Because the New England tradition of discussing town issues at the town hall or the town square is stretches back to the earliest days of European settlement on this
Right.
continent. But it doesn't, I mean, it's fine for a town, but even at the state level, it gets difficult. I mean, how do you gather 8 million New Yorkers to talk about New York City? 11 million Los Angelinos, all this
Yeah.
sort of thing. So it's a little bit more unwieldy. So I'm interested to see kind of how would you, given our basic, you have a judiciary, a legislative, and an executive. Obviously, different countries have different versions of that, but that's the basic structure.
Right.
Of the basic framework, how do we fix and modify this to make it more responsive and more participatory, but not in a burdensome way?
So, I would not dismiss these sort of local solutions. I think what they tell me is that we have to think about how we can decentralize system in such a way that people can meaningfully participate at the local level, and that will not, be possible beyond that. But I think to sort of allow local people to make local decisions about their own lives. I think that's already a big step. And then to bind this into a system of sort of, a federal system where this then scales up maybe. But, if you look around, and my research has been also historical, for example, there's a lot of countries actually in Latin America, particularly that have made voting mandatory. In Brazil,
Oh,
for example, you
Australia.
and there's other countries in Latin America, Ecuador, there's Bolivia, there's other countries
Yeah.
where you got to vote. And if you don't vote, you get in trouble because next time you want to renew some paperwork or whatever, do something with the state, there is a fine or there is some sort of problem you get. So there is an incentive, there is a mandatory voting. And I think that alone makes for more active citizens. In Brazil, even there's a system where they allow people with age 16 and 17 to voluntarily vote if they want, recognizing that the country is a young country, so they give even the younger voters a vote. Um, but it makes for a more active participation. And that clearly, because we have also seen in Brazil what happens, there is not the one solution for everything. But I think if these are innovations that make sense to create a more active citizenry. Um, I've seen, for example, I'm inspired also by the ancient systems, Greek and Roman Republic systems where they limited terms to one term. You could be a consul in Rome for 1 year and you could not uh, run again. Um, these are always a sort of dividing power, limiting power, so that the gap between the rulers and the rule doesn't grow. So, limiting office holding to one term is an interesting thing that I have seen. Um, Even also out of these ancient systems, they had a system where they said, well, once you held office, you will afterwards be held accountable, and we will see what you have done, and we will prosecute you if you have squandered money or if you have lied to us or you have betrayed us, whatever you have done, we're going to hold you accountable. I think these are all sort of small steps to hold power more accountable. Um, so there's some of those. I think in a general sense, I'm inspired by some of the European systems where local municipalities have more budgetary autonomy, where they can make decisions at the city level, at the town level. So they have more of a sense of, at least in their own realm, they can make decisions for themselves. So decentralization and allowing for that, that's inspiring. And what is really has been really inspiring in my research has been these solutions of, on the one side, indigenous people in Latin America. On the other side, this research in Botswana was also very inspiring. So I can tell you about this if you want.
No, no, please. Yeah, no. This is the solution segment. So we're going to hear about some other possibilities of what we might want to do to reform things.
Well, look, I mean, so Botswana is an interesting country. I went there about 2 or 3 years ago now. Didn't spend a lot of time. I went there to familiarize myself with their system because I had heard about that they had local community councils. So in every town and in smaller cities, divided up in every neighborhood, they have what they call a kotla. And a kotla is sort of a public assembly. It's a meeting place. It's a round um, area where people meet and they discuss public matters. And they have traditional leaders that they had before colonization. They were colonized by the Brits, where then the chief that's there presides over this meeting, and they also invite politicians in. They also have a parliamentary system imposed by the British, but they actually found a way how to have citizens involved, how to discuss matters that matter to them in these kotlas, in these public assemblies. And by doing so, people stay informed. They find access to the political sphere. I was at a kotla, and it was so interesting because there was a prime minister there, and I had never been in a meeting where the prime minister would show up. Now, this is a relatively small country with a small population, but still, the
Right.
prime minister was there and he was held accountable, and people asked him questions. He was very respectful. And I thought, wow, this is a very impressive thing, how the people stay involved and sort of find ways to control politics and how hold politicians accountable. Um, to me, the book that I wrote is then to say, well, this seems to be an old tradition that goes back to before colonialism, and that's how they used to organize themselves. And then the Brits imposed this representative system, which creates the same problems that we are facing. So their representative system is also problematic, but at the local level in their kotlas, they actually have a sense of participation, of control, and also of information. They expose the information because they call the officials in and say what's going on with this hospital or what's going on with this road or what's going on with this whatever you promised us and that was supposed to be done and why is it not happening? So I think that's a very inspiring system of citizen participation and citizen control. So the book, and I have an article about it as well that explains this some more. I found other interesting examples. For example, I went to do some research in Colombia. I went to get familiar with a Native American group there called the Arhuacos, and they live in the north of the country in a mountain area called the Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta, which is by the city of Santa Marta, and they have a reservation, and it turns out that they are able to practice deliberative democracy. Now, deliberative democracy in political science is a big thing because people understand that talking about politics is important, getting informed is important, weighing your opinions with others is important, refining your preferences is important. So they are about 50,000 people up there, and they get together in decentralized meetings and they discuss what they should do and how they should do it and how they should spend their money. Very similar to these town halls, are also similar to what they do still in Switzerland. In now only two cantons in Switzerland, this sort of public assembly thing. So I'm very attracted to, or I was very curious about the public assembly as a way to legitimize laws. To say, well, we all have a say in this. We can all participate. So yeah, I found this among Native American groups in South America. I was in Botswana. I did some research in also in Colombia on a Maroon society, and they too. This is Palenque. This is a city that was founded by runaway slaves, and they have maintained a system of organizing themselves around age groups, which is also very interesting because they join early on in their lives an age group of 10, 15 people, all of the same age. They call it quagru, and that group remains with them for the rest of their lives. So they found a way to never, beyond the family, to build solidarity and support each other. And they're very, very organized. So they also run a very tight organizational life. So talk about civics of the heart. I mean, if you have studied political science, Tocqueville, the habits of the heart that they really cultivate that. So I think there's some inspiring examples how we can keep people involved, interested, and with a sense of control over the systems under which they live.
Yeah, I think the one thing that stands out, sorry, a little bit of dry throat. Um, I think the thing that stands out for me is that all of these examples are relatively small.
Yes.
My concern is, and the system in Botswana with the Kotlas reminds me of a little bit of the Soviet Union system with Soviets, which started the smallest Soviet was like a town board sort of thing, and then scaled up to the Central Committee. And if you wanted to rise to power in the Soviet Union, you joined the Communist Party and you started out, in a Soviet in a job. And if you, did a good enough job and became friends with the right people, sort of thing, then, you could eventually get elected, get up into the People's Assembly and then into the Central Committee. Or in China, they just assign you to the People's Congress every 5 years, and you get a little message saying you've been assigned. Arrive at Beijing at this day, which is one way of doing it. Almost like democratic jury duty sort of thing. So that kind of reminds me of that. But all of these things, I think at the local level, encouraging, you know, in this country, be at the county level, maybe. Um, to have lots of interaction between towns and counties and between counties and all that sort of thing, and that kind of control things. But then when you start thinking in a country as large as the United States, you know, then it's kind of like, how do you run a country that is massive in its geography with a population of 350 million people, um, in this effective way where people are involved at a deep level, where to most of the country, Washington, D.C., I grew up out west in Colorado and lived in Seattle for 10 years. D.C.'s far away. It's hours by air, much less any other means of transportation. We might need to move the capital to Denver at some point. But it's more centrally located. But it's a far away thing. People are flying back and forth, all this type of thing. It's a lot to ask, any one person to take that on, which is why we pay people modest amounts of money to do it. Um, I worry that it's a bit of a scale problem.
Yeah. Well, this is let me first talk to the other thing that you said. This reminds you of the Soviet system. So if you look at, of course, how the revolution in Russia started. I mean, I'm not a specialist in the Russian Revolution, but I do understand that the Soviets started us like something like this of local councils of people getting involved, and it was then co-opted by the state, by power from
Yeah.
above. It was the Bolsheviks who
Thanks,
took that over.
Stalin. Yeah.
So what I have seen in Botswana is not at all like this. There is no path towards power with local citizen forums. It's just like in town halls, there is no path towards power that then connects you to whatever position you might want to be in. No, this is a way for people to participate in the crafting of the sort of their own lives and the design of their own lives, and they defend that. So I think that is a way of at the local level participate and sort of assert control over your own destiny and so secure sovereignty. Now, you're right, this is a scale issue. At least that's how it's presented all the time. My suspicion is that that we actually might, I'm actually pretty sure we have the means to scale this up. The problem is we have never tried it. So right now we just say, well, there's no alternatives to what we have, and that's been repeated over and over, like from Churchill to Thatcher and all these people. Well, this is just how it is. And
Right.
this, as a researcher, I feel like it's an important contribution that I can make is to say, well, actually, there are some alternatives, and we need the courage to try that and incrementally maybe try these out because we have the technology, we have internet, we have communication. We actually could create systems that allow for a more decentralized participation. If you look at Switzerland, where they get together in some of these cantons to make decisions on that day. They give free train tickets. Now, they support citizens to come and join. This is not that expensive. There's some colleagues of mine out of Georgetown who have brought citizens to Washington, D.C. Nablo is his name, this professor, and exposed citizens, gave them information, and let them deliberate. And at the end, they looked at what kind of decisions they were able to make, and they found that these decisions were pretty informed and pretty good decisions if people are exposed, if people get information and so they created it. This is not impossible because we have the logistics. I mean, we can vote for American Idol like, quickly. We can vote for whatever.
No,
Nation.
there was an article years ago that said, why on earth are we still voting at the state level with precincts and voting centers and all this type of thing? My goodness, how inefficient. There's got to be a better way, like digitally, online, something where, there's got to be a better way to do this. And the advantage of we could then change the Constitution so that Congress could, and this happens at the state level, but we don't have it nationally, a referendum.
Yeah.
So in Colorado, I worked in the Colorado state legislature, which is why I use this as an example. The
Mhm.
state legislature can decide to not decide, and it can refer it to the people and put it on the ballot next election instead. The people also can get enough signatures to put things on the ballot themselves. That's how legal marijuana came in Colorado. I was one of the idiots standing outside the grocery store asking for signatures back in 2012. And so we don't have that at the national level. I think that would be a good idea that Congress could simply refer things to the people and we could have, even a special election, which we don't have any constitutional way of calling that. States do this now. States do this all the time now. You'll have special elections for things. Even counties. Oh, the fire department needs money. We have to vote. Okay, we'll have an election. Sort of thing. And so it, and so it goes. We don't have that at the national level, and that would be an important um an important an important modification. But one of the things I am hearing out of all of this is that we, and maybe the mandatory voting helps this, we just need more civic participation.
Yes.
And the other thing I was also going to mention, I wanted to get your reaction to this, is, and I've said this for some years now, especially in America, our national legislature is way too small for a country of our size. We haven't changed it since 1912 when Arizona joined the Union and we fixed the House at 435 seats and we just shuffle them around the nation. Um the only additions we got were Alaska and Hawaii, which came in the 50s. And I've always thought about like aren't like I we would need to me the House should be 1,500 people minimum,
I think,
and and every state gets a third senator. Like we need to just triple the size of Congress, because that would be much more representative especially in large states like Florida, Texas, California, New York. It would be much more representative. Anyway, I've said a lot of things. I'll let you respond. So
no, but
sorry.
I think you're right because I think this is the first thing you said about the referenda. I think this is it. We know this is possible.
Right.
If there's a political will. We have the technology. We can do this. We can pull this off easily. What's still missing there, though, and is I just went to vote 3 days ago here in Texas on the primary, and it was a typical experience for me. I live here, I go there, and then half of the stuff on the ballot I'm not familiar with. There's names that I have never heard. I had not a chance to talk with anybody about this. There's propositions that are formulated in such a way that they're weird. I'm not quite understanding what they actually propose.
Yes.
Because again, I didn't have a chance to talk with anybody about this. So it's not just, about voting. Again, some colleagues have written books where they say democracy when people are thinking we have to have a chance to deliberate, to interchange each other, to discuss these things before we make decisions. So deliberation is an important component in thinking about how can we get this in, and that's where these town halls become important. That's where we talk about things. Now,
Yeah.
I think I agree with you. Right now we have each representative representing like over 100,000 people. How is that possible? How can one person, even in theory, represent the will of over 100,000 people? That's not possible. It
No.
can't work. So we have to rethink this. And I do think that the whole, the idea of political representation is problematic. It's hard, I'm always saying in my class, I'm a married man, but I don't really trust that I can represent the will of my wife or one person. Now, how can I represent the will of 100,000 people? It leads to what we see right now. It leads to people performing, it leads to spectacle, it leads to people polarizing. I have the sense that politicians are more polarized than the people. I don't think that people are that polarized. I don't think that people are that antagonistic. I think it's politicians who fan that because they need to, divide people so they can create platforms. So then, they can get reelected on those platforms. So I think we need to rethink this. We need to look for solutions that allow us to control this more as citizens. And
I do love that idea of people organizing before an election to talk through judges. No one ever knows who the judges you vote for are, and I'll admit I'm a lazy voter. I just don't vote for any of them. I'm like, judges, no. A new face is always a good thing. No, like just no to all of y'all. But I mean, I've sat with people, especially new voters who've turned 18. It's their first election, and they're reading through all of this, and it's kind of like, okay, here's what this means. Let's get out our voter guide, and we sit and read together, and all this type of thing. I know in the last election, for places where mail-in voting is allowed, it was a group thing. And I think, there's even, I have other friends who've done the same thing with younger voters, or, we talk ahead of time for, when we live in the same location. I don't live where most of my friends do anymore, so we don't talk that much anymore. But we used to do, when I had local friends and all this type of thing, we used to do that. And I think it is happening a little bit in homes, in living rooms, all this type of thing. But I think when you talk about that, I think it also is so emblematic of that used to happen in churches, it used to happen in bars, pubs, all this type of thing. And with the death of those third spaces, where essentially most of the public is either a workspace or a home space, and there's very little in between,
right.
in American society now, we've lost that chance to have those conversations,
You're right. I think, and we're losing community. I see it where I live. People retreat, and people then are being sort of polarized from the system, and they end up being scared of each other. They distance themselves from each other. There's been also work on that and how we are losing these spaces. And Bowling Alone was an important book that
Yes, it
came
was.
out of it. But what's clear to me is this. Again, when you look at the solutions, there is a colleague who is at Stanford. Fishkin is his name, James Fishkin. He has a whole thing about deliberative polling, and it's an interesting model. It relies on randomly selecting people, sort of a representative sample, get them together, give them 3 days, give them information, let them talk to each other in small groups, and then make a decision that that ends up being very good. End up being very good decisions. They have done this in several scenarios in Ireland, in Mongolia when they came to rewriting the constitution. And this is being tried right now, but the problem is right now it happens just at the polling level, and then at the end there's no decision-making power involved. But I think there is some interesting inspirational stuff happening. For example, the deliberative polling that Fishkin sort of guides wherever they ask him to do that, where random selection is a part of it. Average citizens get a chance to imagine this. I mean, you get a chance they fly you to DC, give you information for 3 days, different viewpoints. Then you get together with some other citizens, sort of a representative sample of the country, and then you make a decision. Why is that not better? Or how can they be worse than professional politicians who are exposed to the lobbying, who are exposed to who bring in their own interest? I think these are inspiring examples, and I think we could learn from them.
No, no, I mean that's kind of similar to what they do with the People's Congress in China. You're just notified by mail. You've selected to show up here in Beijing on this day. Now that's different because that's all ran by the Communist Party. Nothing actually of any value happens there. But if that was a functioning legislative body that was deliberative like that, and it's 6,000 people. I mean, it's a huge, and it takes place in all the people in Beijing. It's huge. If that were an actually legislative body, not completely dominated by the CCP, that would be a powerful room in
Right.
order to decide the future of China. It makes for great theater for state television right now, but it could be a very powerful body. And indeed, at the end of the Soviet Union, we saw that was how the Soviet Union began to break apart. Representatives from Soviet bloc nations in the National Assembly. Latvia, I think, was the first to declare its independence from the Soviet Union, and the other Baltics followed suit. And they were doing that there in small groups, from all of these places, being like, yeah, perestroika and glasnost ain't cutting it, buddy. We're leaving, sort of thing. Um, so I
Well,
mean, yeah, it would be cool if Congress was, that sort of, yeah, you head on, you head on down to the Congress and you're gonna spend some time doing this and go from there. That would be an interesting concept.
I mean, we could try it. It doesn't have to, we don't have to give it all the power right away, but we could try to say, let's randomly select some citizens. Let's invite them, treat them, fly them out there, let them deliberate and see what kind of solutions they come up with and what kind of decisions they make. And if it works out, why not try it? And if you combine it with, being actively involved at the local level and then maybe have an experience like this once in a lifetime where you have the chance to go to DC or even internationally, if you have a chance to go and participate at the United Nations, and instead of professionals being there, like average citizens who bring, who get information, get exposed to discuss these in small groups, and then make decisions. I think these are inspiring things that are possible. It's just that there's no will. I think the problem is always how distant we are from power and how wide the gap is between those who make decisions and those who live under them. And I think we need to find ways to narrow that gap.
Yeah,
Otherwise,
I think the troubling trend I've seen so much of over the last several years is people really abdicating that power. And I have a buddy of mine who he's bless his heart, but he's ready for a great leader. Like he would like a great leader to come and take responsibility for all of this stuff that he does, kind of, leave us alone, to our televisions and our living rooms. I'm quoting network right now. Like, sort of thing. And just, to handle that, in the right way that lets everybody live their lives and all this type of thing. And I wonder, like, I wonder which is more dominant. Like, who, in your view, is the impetus towards more involvement, maybe more in the lead, or is it this, yeah, we just want to abdicate basically to a dictator because we're tired of this?
well, I think it's divided. I think there's actually even serious political scientists, debate about this because the system as it is right now is, doesn't reward participation. It becomes arduous, it becomes time consuming, and you expose yourself. So I think there's no real incentive to actually get involved and participate. This would require a sort of a change in the system. I can tell you from my work when I was still a social worker in Brazil, people don't want to participate if they have nothing to decide. No, I was,
Mm.
responsible for the participation in a slum urbanization project back there. But as soon as, people understand, okay, this is about my home, this is about my house, and, they will participate if they have actually something to say. Now, if they waste time, and if it's like in China or like in Cuba where people are very organized but have no power at the end, it's a frustrating experience. So I think participation only works if there's real things to decide, if there's real rewards, if you have a sense that what you say actually makes a difference. We would have to be smart and design systems that allow for that. If not, then it becomes frustrating. People say, well, I'm wasting my time here and it has no impact. And I've seen this, and then people retreat, and it's no wonder they retreat. And
Yeah.
then, of course, we become easy victims of all kinds of, what I would probably call, some other people have called fabricated ignorance. Then we have all kinds of weird ideas how this works, come up with all kinds of weird theories of pizza eating, whatever, children eating, or I don't know what.
Yeah.
But that's because we don't really understand how it works. That goes back all the way to Plato, who says you need practical knowledge. You don't need to be a specialist in politics, but you need to understand how this works. And we're losing this. And we become victims to manipulation.
The lack of civic education and the amount of time I spend explaining basics to people in my comment section or even just personal friends. I'm like, didn't you learn this in school? We had to take civics, and that's when I figured out we haven't taught civics in this country in 25 years. Thank you, George W. Bush and No Child Left Behind. They couldn't standardize tests for civics, so they quit teaching it, kind of like the arts, and Race to the Top with Obama made it even worse. So now you have a generation and a half of people who genuinely, through no fault of their own, do not know how their basic government
Yes.
works.
Yes. I think this is
And it is just, and I'm kind of like, that makes a lot of what happens on the internet make sense now. Okay. And so, yeah, so I've been developing a course and whatnot to help people learn to engage with their government and the system. Um, I feel like it's also very hard because you have to have a lot of expertise in order to rule on in order to make decisions on these very complicated matters and to do it very well. And when you start getting into things like industrial policy, pollution, the environment, education, all of these things, I think most anybody would just simply be overwhelmed by the amount of information and how to decide. And I think that's also a barrier for people as well. Because the world is a lot more complicated than it used to be. I think
but
that's the impetus of people who don't want to participate, is they're
right,
kind of
right.
like,
But
I don't want to know about any of this. So,
you're
yeah,
right. I mean, I think you're right. I see the same thing in my classes. It's not their fault. They don't understand how the system works. They feel manipulated. I think for democracy to survive, we need to hold those in power accountable and in control. Otherwise, it's not a democracy. Otherwise, it's some sort of other
right,
system. But democracy means people rule, average people rule. And so if we
right.
don't defend that, then of course those who have the power and have the insight and have the influence, they will run away with it, and then do what they think is best, and they no longer need us for this system. Now, if you're right, some of these matters are complicated, but if you look at the people who are right now in Congress, they don't strike me as specialists in the fields that are in either. It's not like that we have people who
No,
are actually trained in these fields who then have authority over a given field, be it health or be
yeah.
it whatever other field that they have responsibility
Well, I
over.
mean, but that's European technocratic stuff. I mean, that's where, I mean, whether it's the European Parliament, MEPs, or even local countries, you get that sort of more technocratic influence. And that's how Europe has tried to solve that problem, you know?
Also, it's democracy is about people power and people controlling and holding those in power accountable and reining them in. And this has gotten we losing this. They running away. The gap is becoming wider. The people are less informed. We have less control, and people feel frustrated. So I think the only solution must be how to assert more control and get more involved, so that we have a sense that this is our world, this is our system. We do what we understand is right, and we might not always agree, but democracy also means finding platforms where we can discuss our disagreements, which we have lost. As you said, these
Yeah.
spaces where we can talk about differences are no longer there. It's just we have enemies now, and we're polarized, and we don't even want to talk to the other people who have different opinions. That can't be it. If we continue that way, then democracy will get lost, and we end up in authoritarianism, which we already see signs for, not just here, but in other countries as well.
Yeah, and I think for me, I always figured things were going that way. I thought it would take longer. I thought that would be something more towards the end of my life. We're about 20 years ahead of the schedule that I had decided about 10 years ago. And I kind of saw where things were. And I said, yeah, I think, you know, it's given how the system works now and the fact that the regular person basically has no representation in their government beyond the municipal level. Um, that, eventually people are just going to throw up their hands and say, screw it. Who wants to actually do this stuff? Let's put them in charge. Little did I know that the answer would be in 2016 and it would be Donald Trump. But sort of thing. But eventually people are going to get tired of all of this. I didn't realize how far down the path we already had gone. And now looking back at the last decade, it's so obvious now. But in talking to other people, especially people of because I have very diverse political opinions, we have very diverse political opinions on this show. In talking to so many of these other people, there is a very small group of people who care enough to be able to go and engage with the stuff and do it, and everyone else is pretty much checked out. And let's also face it, the modern working life for the average person is scheduled in such a way and overtaxed in such a way that it's very hard to have time for participating in democracy. When a 40-hour week does not guarantee you housing, does not guarantee you food, all this type of thing, it's impossible for someone to want to go and participate in even a city and county discussion when the bills aren't getting paid, they need to pick up an extra shift, their schedule is inconsistent, so they don't even know if they can go till a few days before. There's all these other. I think one of the things. Sorry, I'm like coming to a new conclusion in the middle of this podcast. um, there's other things that make democracy work. It's economics. It's the social fabric, and we've lost both. So
Yeah.
it's kind of not a wonder that democracy is in peril. We've lost the social fabric that undergirds it. Most people literally can't afford to be a participant in their own government. When you lose both of those things, you end up with this facsimile of a democracy, but one, and here's the convenient part for those who have money and power, one that can be easily manipulated.
Right. No, I think you're totally right. I think if we all operate in a
Sorry,
level
I
of,
just came up with that like right now. Like it's
I think you're right. It's interconnected. If we all operate on the basis of scarcity and being worried about, how to make it to next week, then democracy is not our cannot be our priority. So I think you're right. It has to do with healthcare. It has to do with housing. It has to do with jobs that are secure, that would allow us to actually spend some days away if we do something like that. If we say, well, let's
yeah.
facilitate. It's apparently we have the money because didn't Trump just offer $100,000 for each person in Greenland? So
Yes.
it doesn't seem to be a lack of money, is a lack of will to actually use that money towards our own citizens, where we create jobs where they say, okay, I'm going to be gone for 3 days because I'm going to be in Washington and be involved in this, and I'm come back and my job's waiting on me. It's not a precarious job, but it's
Right.
there, and I don't have to worry about losing it. I don't have to worry about missing 3 days. I think it's all within the realm of possible. This is the richest country in the world. How is it that
Yeah.
we're not able to do that? Uh, this is not a lack of means; it's a lack of will. So I think we need to we need to
Always.
be careful to. Otherwise, we lose this very precious this democracy. We lose it if we don't control it more.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. So, well, we're way over time.
Oh,
We usually do 45 minutes. We've gone the full hour and we're over. This is an absolutely fascinating conversation, and we could sit here and go another hour. Let's
yes.
not do that. So, why don't we get to this part of the show where we do plugs? Let us know where we can find your books or we can keep up with you online, and we'll go from there.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Yes, where would we find you online? Where would we find your books?
Oh, well, I have a website, it's Bernd Reiter, PhD.com. I also have, my books are available on Amazon. I have an Amazon author page there. Some of these issues are discussed there. But the basic entry is certainly my personal website, www.berndreiterphd.com.
Wonderful. Excellent. All right, Bernd, thank you so much for coming on the Cameron Journal podcast.
Thank you for
That's all for this episode of the Cameron Journal podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Visit us online at CameronJournal.com. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and I love to talk to my followers and listeners, so please feel free to get us on social media at Cameron Cowan on Twitter, and we'll see you next time on the Cameron Journal podcast.